There is a version of betrayal that breaks you, and there is a version that builds you. The difference is not in what was done to you. The difference is in what you decide to do with the wreckage. Some people sit in the ruins and mourn the structure that used to stand. Some people look at the rubble and start calculating what they can build with it. The girl in this story sat in the ruins for exactly as long as she needed to, and then she stood up. And what she built from what they left behind was so far beyond anything they had imagined for her that the word comeback does not cover it. This was not a comeback. This was an arrival. The arrival of someone who had been on her way for a very long time and who had been slowed but never stopped by the people who thought they had ended her. They had not ended her. They had only made her ruthless. Not ruthless in the way her enemies were ruthless, which was careless and petty and driven by fear. Ruthless in the way that the best kind of people become ruthless when they have been pushed far enough. Focused, precise, completely without apology. Ruthless in the service of her own life, her own vision, her own refusal to be defined by what was done to her in the chapter that was supposed to be the end. It was not the end. It was the beginning. Her name was Iris, and the people who betrayed her were not strangers. That is the first thing you need to understand. Strangers cannot betray you. Strangers can hurt you, can damage you, can take things from you, but betrayal requires intimacy. Betrayal requires that you gave someone your trust, your time, your interior world, and they used the access you gave them to dismantle you from the inside. Betrayal is an inside job. And what was done to Iris was done by the people she had considered her closest allies, her business partner, her mentor, and the man she had loved. All three, within the same 18-month period. All three people she had structured her professional and personal life around. All three people who had the most access to her vulnerabilities and her plans and her private self turned. Not together, not conspiratorially, though it sometimes felt that way in the dark nights afterward. Separately, and for their own separate reasons, each of them chose their own interests over their relationship with her in ways that caused real and lasting damage. And the combination of the three, arriving as it did in the same compressed window of time, was something that would have finished a less extraordinary person. Iris was not a less extraordinary person. She just did not know that yet. She had grown up the kind of child who made adults nervous in a specific way. Not badly behaved, not loud or difficult or demanding. Nervous in the way adults get around children who seem to be thinking about something the adults cannot access, who ask questions that go one layer deeper than expected, who look at you with a steadiness that suggests they are evaluating rather than simply receiving. She had been that child, and she had grown into that adult. And in a world that rewards performance and visibility, her particular kind of intelligence had always been slightly undervalued because it did not announce itself. She had grown up in a family that valued education above everything and could not always afford to provide it. Her parents were both educators themselves, a particular kind of irony, people who gave their professional lives to learning and came home to a house where the budget for books was often in competition with the budget for groceries. She had learned from them the habit of intellectual seriousness and the discipline of working harder than the resources available to you strictly require. She had also learned from watching them a lesson she carried privately and never quite articulated until she was older, which was that intelligence without strategy produces very little. That knowing things is not the same as building things. That the world does not reward knowledge, it rewards applied knowledge. It rewards people who can take what they understand and make something from it that other people need. She had gone to university on a full scholarship and studied law, not because she wanted to be a lawyer, but because she understood that law was a language and that people who spoke it fluently could operate in the world with a precision that people who did not speak it could not match. She was not wrong about this. She graduated near the top of her class, practiced briefly at a firm where she was good and deeply unhappy, and at 27 left to start a legal technology company that addressed a specific inefficiency she had observed and been frustrated by for 2 years. The inefficiency was real. the solution was intelligent, and she moved with a speed and certainty that reflected the fact that she had been thinking about this since before she left the firm. She met her business partner Marcus in the early days of building the company. He was a technologist, brilliant at the infrastructure side of things she was not naturally drawn to, and their skills were genuinely complementary in the way that the best partnerships are. He was also warm and funny and easy to work with, and she trusted him quickly, perhaps more quickly than was wise. But she was 27 and building something for the first time, and she needed to trust someone. And he presented himself as trustworthy, with a completeness she found convincing. Her mentor was a woman named Sylvia, older, established, with a reputation in the legal technology space that Iris had admired from a distance before Sylvia had reached out after reading a piece Iris had published. Sylvia became important to her quickly, the kind of mentor relationship that feels like a gift, like someone handing you a map of terrain you have been navigating blind. Sylvia made introductions, gave advice, provided context Iris did not have, and Iris was grateful with a gratitude that was genuine and deep, and that made her somewhat less discerning than she might otherwise have been about the terms of the mentorship. The man was named Julian. She had met him at a conference, and they had talked for 3 hours at a dinner table, long after everyone else had moved on, and she had walked back to her hotel, knowing she was in some trouble. They had been together for 2 years when the 18 months of betrayal began. He was not the first to move against her. He was the last. And in some ways the most damaging, because by the time she discovered what he had done, she had already been weakened by the others, and she did not have the resources she would have had if she had faced it at full strength. It started with Marcus. 3 years into the company, when the growth was beginning to become real and the valuation was rising, and the decisions about the next stage of the business were consequential, Marcus began making moves that she did not know about. He cultivated relationships with investors behind her back. Not illegally, not initially, but with an agenda she was not party to, building a coalition of support for a version of the company's future that was significantly different from the one they had agreed on. She discovered this when an investor called her for a routine conversation and referenced a meeting with Marcus she had not known had taken place. The investor was confused by her confusion. Marcus had apparently not mentioned that Iris was unaware. She confronted Marcus with the same directness she brought to everything. He did not deny it. He presented his alternative vision for the company with the polish of someone who had been preparing the argument for months, which told her the preparation had been happening while they were still having their regular strategy conversations, while she was still trusting him completely, while she had believed they were building the same thing. He was not building the same thing. He had been building something else, using the foundation she had helped lay, using the access she had given him, using the trust she had extended without condition. The legal process of separating their partnership was long and ugly in the specific way that business divorces are ugly, all the more so when there is genuine personal betrayal underneath the professional dispute. She handled it. She hired excellent legal counsel, and she was thorough, and she protected what she had built to the extent she could, though the process cost her time and money and organizational momentum at a point when she could least afford to lose any of those things. In the middle of the Marcus situation, while she was already stretched thin by the legal and operational demands of the separation, Sylvia moved. She had, Iris discovered, been sharing information. Not dramatically, not in any way Iris could prove would constitute a legal violation, but sharing information nonetheless. Context and strategy and the specific intelligence Iris had confided in the privacy of their mentorship relationship. Sharing it with a competitor who was, Iris later discovered, an old professional ally of Sylvia's, someone whose success in a specific market Sylvia had personal and financial reasons to support. Sylvia had been sitting across from Iris at monthly lunches, asking the questions a mentor asks, and she had been taking the answers back to someone who was using them to compete against Iris directly. When Iris understood this, she felt something she had not felt during the Marcus situation, which had been primarily anger and shock. What she felt about Sylvia was a colder, and in some ways more clarifying emotion, something close to grief, but without the heat of it. Sylvia had represented something larger than a professional relationship. She had represented proof that a woman could reach back for the women coming behind her, that the world contained that kind of generosity, that Iris was not navigating entirely alone. The loss of that belief was different from the loss of a partnership. It required a different kind of mourning. She mourned it. She allowed herself that. She did not pretend it did not hurt or perform resilience for anyone who was watching. She sat with the particular sadness of it and let it move through her, and then she did what she always did. She got precise. She identified exactly what information had been shared and when and with what consequences. She moved methodically to address the competitive damage where it could be addressed. She restructured her confidentiality practices with the thoroughness of someone who has learned an expensive lesson and intends to learn it only once. Julian was the last. And Julian was the one she had not seen coming. Not because she was naive, but because she had been so focused on the professional devastation of the preceding months that she had perhaps not been paying the kind of attention to her personal life that would have shown her the signs earlier. He had not been unfaithful to her. What he had done was different and in some ways harder to categorize, but not harder to understand in its impact. He had taken information about her company, things she had shared with him in the intimacy of their relationship, the plans and vulnerabilities and strategic thinking she had processed aloud with the person she trusted most personally, and he had used them. He had made an investment decision, a significant one, using information that had come to him not as an investor, but as her partner. When she found out, it was through a financial trail that a forensic accountant, by then a regular feature of her professional life, identified during a routine review. She sat with this one for a long time before she did anything. This was the one that required the most stillness before action, because the action available to her was real and serious, and she needed to be certain before she moved. She was certain. She moved. With the legal fluency she had spent years building, with the thoroughness that was the most fundamental characteristic of how she operated, with the coldness that had developed in her over the preceding 18 months, the particular temperature a person reaches when they have been betrayed enough times in enough ways to stop being surprised by what people are willing to do. She ended the relationship and reported the information. Both things, simultaneously. She did not agonize over either decision. She had already done all the agonizing she was going to do. What came after was clarity, clean and cold and precise, and she followed it without hesitation. The reports and the legal processes that followed were not quick. They stretched over another 18 months, during which she was also trying to stabilize and rebuild her company with the remaining foundation. A foundation that had been significantly shaken, but not, she kept reminding herself, and eventually came to believe fully, destroyed. The company was still standing. She was still standing. The people who had moved against her had taken things and damaged things and complicated things enormously, but they had not taken the core of what she had built, because the core of what she had built was inside her and not available to them. During this period, she did something she had not expected to do. She became still. Not passive, not withdrawn from the work, but internally still in a way she had not been before the betrayals, when her energy had been constantly outward, constantly in motion, building and projecting and pushing forward. The stillness was not a choice. It came over her the way certain states come, without permission, as a response to something the body and mind know before the conscious self catches up. She needed to stop moving long enough to understand what had happened to her, and why, and what it meant about the way she had been operating in the world. She spent a year in that stillness, while simultaneously working harder than she ever had. These two things coexisted because they belonged to different levels of her. On the surface, she was relentlessly active, managing legal processes and rebuilding client relationships and restructuring operations and hiring carefully and doing the 1,000 daily acts of keeping a company alive. Underneath, she was very quiet, very honest with herself, asking the questions she had previously been moving too fast to ask. She asked why she had trusted Marcus so quickly. She asked what she had needed from Sylvia that had made her slightly less discerning about the nature of the relationship. She asked what she had been looking for in Julian that had softened her attention to risk. The answers were not comfortable, but they were useful. They were, in fact, the most useful information she had ever gathered about herself. She had been building with her full intelligence and energy and vision, and she had been building with a certain emotional hunger that had made her vulnerable in ways her intelligence had not caught, because the hunger was not located in the part of her that was intelligent. It was located in the part that wanted, more than she had admitted, to not be alone in the building, to have people she could count on completely, to be known. She was known. She had just chosen the wrong people to know her. This was not a self-blame exercise. She was precise about that distinction. What those people had done was their choice and their responsibility, and she did not take on the weight of their moral failures. But the patterns she had run that gave them access, those were hers to understand and hers to change. She changed them, methodically, structurally, from the inside out. At 34, the company stabilized. At 35, it began growing again, carefully and with the specific kind of momentum that comes when a foundation has been tested and held. She had restructured everything. The legal architecture was tighter. The partnerships were built differently, with clarity and documentation and an honesty about interests that she now required before she extended trust. The team she was building was built on different principles, people chosen not just for skill, but for a transparency she could verify rather than simply feel. She was different too. The softness that had made her vulnerable was not gone. She was careful to protect it inside her because she understood it was also what made her good at her work. The part of her that genuinely cared about people and problems and solutions that actually served the humans they were designed for. But it was no longer available without conditions. She had learned, at considerable cost, to require something before she opened. Not suspicion, not coldness, but a quality of earned access that she had previously given away too freely. The ruthlessness that developed in her was not cruelty. She wants to be clear about that, and so she was, in every context in which it came up. She did not become someone who hurt people for advantage. She did not become the thing that had been done to her. What she became was precise in a way that brooked no sentimentality about her own interests. She knew what she was building, and she knew what it required, and she made decisions in service of that, with a clarity that sometimes looked cold to people who expected her to be more accommodating, who had perhaps relied on a softer version of her to let things slide that she no longer let slide. She negotiated differently, with a thoroughness that her counterparts came to both respect and find slightly unnerving because she always knew more than they expected, and she always protected her position better than they had planned for. She hired differently. She managed differently. She built relationships in the business world differently, with a warmth that was genuine and a limit that was firm. And people who worked with her regularly came to understand that both things were real, and that the combination was unusually effective. At 37, she took her company public. The process was the most demanding thing she had done in a career full of demanding things, and she handled it with the particular completeness that had become her signature. She knew every number and every risk and every question the market would ask, and she had answers that were not just prepared, but true, which in the world of public offerings is both a legal requirement and a competitive advantage. The offering was oversubscribed. The first day of trading went well. She stood in the room where these things are marked, and she felt the specific satisfaction of a person who has brought something across a threshold that required everything they had to reach. She thought about Marcus when she saw the valuation. Not with anger. Anger was for things that still had the capacity to hurt you, and Marcus had lost that capacity a long time ago. She thought about him with something more like interest. The intellectual interest of a person who can now see the full shape of a story that was once too close to see clearly. He had thought, by taking what he took, he was getting the better position. He had not understood that the position he was taking from was not the asset. The asset was the person who had built it and would build again. She thought about Sylvia with something more complex. The grief was real, and she had done the work of it, and it had left something that was not quite scar tissue but was in that neighborhood, a slightly different texture in the place where uncomplicated trust and mentorship had used to live. She had other mentors now, built on different terms, and she was also becoming a mentor herself to younger women coming into her industry. And she was a particular kind of mentor, one who was honest about difficulty and specific about risk, and who made it a priority to give the women she mentored the kind of clear-eyed support she had needed and not fully received. She was repaying something. She was also ensuring that what had happened to her happened to fewer people coming behind her. Julian had moved through the legal process and out the other side, and was living somewhere she did not know and did not need to know. She had loved him, and he had been willing to use what she had given him, and that was a story she had closed and filed and did not reopen. The chapter had ended. She did not need to keep reading it. She had a life at 39 that was full in ways that the life before the betrayals, for all its energy and momentum, had not been. She had built more carefully, and the things she had built were therefore more solid. She had friendships that were real and chosen with care, and that had proven themselves over time and difficulty. She had a relationship, a new one, begun later than she would have chosen, at 36, with a man who had come recommended by his track record of honesty in situations where dishonesty would have been easier, which was the specific qualification she had come to value above all others. She had a practice of knowing herself that she had not had before, a daily habit of internal honesty that kept her clear in a way that no external success could substitute for. She had a company that was publicly traded and growing and led by a team she had built and trusted, and whose trust she had earned. She had a reputation in her industry that was complex and specific and hers, the reputation of someone who was formidably good and undeceivable and fair. And that combination, she had come to understand, was unusually powerful. People wanted to work with her because she was excellent. People also trusted working with her because they knew she would not be taken advantage of in any negotiation that involved them, which meant their interests were safer in her hands than in softer ones. She gave an interview at 40 to a journalist writing about resilience and business leadership. The journalist asked her what the betrayals had taken from her, and she thought about it honestly before answering. She said they had taken time and money and organizational momentum and the specific innocence of a person who has not yet been tested at that depth. She said all of those losses had been real, and some of them had been painful in ways she still felt occasionally if she pressed on the right spot. Then the journalist asked what the betrayals had given her, and she smiled the way she smiled when a question surprised her, which was rare and therefore visible. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said they had given her herself. The version of herself that knew what she was made of because she had needed to know and had found out. The version that was precise and unsentimentally clear about her own interests, not because she was selfish, but because she had learned that a person who does not protect themselves cannot protect anyone else either. The version that trusted with intention rather than hunger. The version that had built twice and knew that what had been taken could not have been the most important thing because the most important thing was still there, had always been there, intact and growing and more developed than it had ever been before everything fell apart. The journalist asked if she had anything she wanted to say to the people who had betrayed her. She thought about this one too, with the same honesty she brought to everything, and she said no. Not because she was protecting them, because she had nothing she needed from them. No acknowledgement, no apology, no recognition. She was complete without any of that. The story she was living did not require their participation in its resolution. It was already resolved, had been for years. Resolved not in a courtroom or a conversation or a confrontation, but in the daily accumulated evidence of her own life. In the company she had rebuilt and taken public, in the team she had built and the culture she had created, and the work that was genuinely good and genuinely useful, in the women she mentored and the knowledge she passed forward, and the specific way she had chosen to respond to damage by building rather than breaking. The girl they had betrayed had come back. Not as the girl she was before. She was done being that girl. She had come back as someone new, someone forged in what they had done and transformed by what she had chosen to do with it. Stronger than they had known she was. More precise than they had anticipated. Completely, uncompromisingly, and permanently ruthless in the service of the life she had decided to build. They had thought betrayal was an ending. It was not an ending. It was a stripping away. It had stripped away the comfortable assumptions and the misplaced trust and the hunger that had made her reach for people without sufficient care. It had stripped away everything that was not structurally sound, and what remained, what they had not been able to touch because it was not available to them, was the foundation. And on the foundation, she had built something that lasted. The best revenge is not the reversal of fortune that makes your betrayers small. It is not the moment they see what you have become and understand what they gave away. The best revenge is the person you become in the years after the betrayal, when no one is watching and you are doing the quiet work of rebuilding yourself from the inside out. It is the clarity you develop when everything false has been burned away. It is the ruthlessness that is not cruelty but precision. The refusal to waste a single day of the life you rebuilt on anything that does not serve the fullest possible version of who you are. The best revenge is arriving, not returning to where you were before they hurt you, arriving somewhere you could only have reached by surviving what they did and choosing, every single day, to build rather than break. The best revenge is the life on the other side of betrayal that is so completely and unshakably yours that the people who tried to take it cannot even find themselves in the story of how you got there. She arrived, all the way, without apology, without hesitation, without looking back. The girl they betrayed came back stronger. She came back ruthless. She came back completely, magnificently, finally, and permanently herself. And that was the best revenge of all.